Yes. Hi. Oh, that's pretty good, actually. Hi. Apparently, it's too good. That's a lot of feedback. Okay. Hi. I got a lot of feedback going on. Here. Test. Okay. No feedback. Okay. So this one's the good one. Baruch. Okay. We're good with the chets and chafs. Okay. Hmm? If you've ever had to clear your throat out, you can speak Hebrew. Oh, yeah, that's what my. So they want to know, well, how come you don't know Yiddish? Because you didn't want me to know. Is it my mom always said she couldn't speak Yiddish, but she could swear in Yiddish. Yeah. I'll leave a pile back here. Oh, there is a pile. Okay. Let's sing. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Amen. L'chaim. I think that is what they give. And our blessing for Torah study, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right. So, we another day, another what? Yes. Shabbat shalom. How it is. So, okay, so there's conversation in the front row. This is, National Day of Hate for a few horrible individuals on this planet. It is actually something that is across the country. My colleagues in other synagogues are also beefing up on security. Yes.
On the 2nd of... Here's the microphone. Thank you, Rabbi. On the 2nd of March, there's going to be a program here at Beth Am on anti-Semitism. It is a very high-level program. Please try and make it. It's going to be moderated by Holly Hefnagel, who is the AJC Director of Anti-Semitism. There will be 2 consuls here, one from Germany and one from the Organization of American States. It will be well worth our while to be there. Here. 7:30 p.m. I'm not sure of the room. I think it's in the chapel. It may be in the social hall, maybe in the sanctuary, but you'll find it.
It'll be in this building. Yeah, so I guess I'll address the elephant in the room then. Not my Torah study plan for today, but yes, there are some small hate groups that are banding together to try and make a big impact today on Shabbat. The congregation, we decided not to send anything out because sometimes our response really gives people more promotion in their efforts than they need, and we don't want anybody think this. Yeah, but we knew about it for a while, but we don't want to promote it throughout the community. Yeah, no. Yes, we don't want to encourage people to participate, exactly. What, yes?
In my 50 years here at Beth Am, I've attended numbers of sessions like this on anti-Semitism, and what was common to all of the sessions is how close to home the anti-Semitism is. It really is close to us. It affects all of us, and my recommendation is to come and listen and know when you look on your right and look on your left, it's right there.
Yeah. So, all right. So there are a lot of homegrown hate groups throughout Florida. We live in a little bit of a bubble in Miami. In that Miami does have a large Jewish population and is very pro-Zionist. So we are lucky. We are lucky that we have such wonderful security. Last night I did mention the irony of it being, on Tikkun Olam Shabbat and Mitzvah Day weekend, where we are really fulfilling the mission as Jews to spread love and to be a light towards others. And then here are people who are hating us. And I don't want to go into a lesson on anti-Semitism. We have one coming up March 2nd. There's another towards the end of the month, March 28th, an anti-bias program called Breaking the Bias, which will be right here in the Bird Bowl. So
These envoys are coming directly from the White House.
yes, right. That being said, we are here to study Torah. And Torah is an opportunity for us to learn how to be better people. Maimonides, which I love, Maimonides says that we don't study Torah to be better Jews. We study Torah to be better humans. And we can have a little bit of both. So our Torah portion this week is Terumah. We are bringing our offerings, building our sanctuary. We're going to build our sanctuary for a few upcoming Torah portions. I'm actually purposefully wearing this necklace. It's lapis lazuli. You know, you always read about it in these Torah portions. And when I was, where was I? I think I was in Peru when I got this. And I was like, no, that's what it's talking about. I was very excited. So we're building a Mishkan. I always love when I talk about the Mishkan with the day school kids, because what do you translate Mishkan to? Tabernacle, right? That means nothing to them, right? So saying Mishkan, saying tabernacle versus Mishkan isn't helpful. But what we could think of the Mishkan being is really a home. We are building a home for God amongst the people. So there's a lot to unpack there. We'll talk about a little bit of that in Minyan. And what are we doing? We're preparing kelim. We're preparing vessels. I'm part of a fellowship. It's called Kli, and it's like a play because it stands for Clergy Leadership Incubator, right? But it's playing on Kli. It's playing on being a vessel. Like, what does it mean to be a vessel for God's teaching? But vessels could also be translated here as furniture, right? A lot of what we're building to build the Mishkan is the furniture that is going to populate it, right? So how wonderful. We have this amazing example just out the door of a new building being built, right? And you can kind of peek in the windows now, which is cool, and see that it looks like it's almost done. But guess what? There's no furniture right now, right? Maybe we've all had that moment, right, where you enter a new house or a new apartment or whatever, and like you have to figure out how to furnish it, right? How are we going to make it special? How are we going to make it home? And so these Torah portions really talk about what are these sacred items that we are building. And each sacred item is imbued with a lot of metaphor and meaning. So we have all of these details in our Torah portion about how to construct this home. And what we're going to get right now, right, we're getting the instructions, then we get the construction, and then we get the review. So some of the furnishings we know, like the menorah, but I want to talk about two other ones, the table, the shulchan, and the aron. All right. So the aron is the ark or the closet. We're going to talk about that word. So I wanted to start with, we're going to work on just one verse. I know, so much. Will you read our first verse, the Shemot?
And you will insert the beams into the rings on the side of the aron, to carry the aron with them. The beams will remain in the rings and will not be removed from it.
Okay. So before we move on to the next section, like the next text, I want to just talk about, like, what do you notice about this verse? It's portable. Thank you. It's portable. Okay. So the aron, they have rings on the side. There's beams in them. And look, the beams will remain in the rings and not be removed from it. Right? So it's always ready to go, always ready to move. You're always like carrying it with you. So there's a lot of beautiful rabbinic texts on this, like about always being able to take Torah with you wherever you go, needing to bring Torah to people instead of waiting for them to come to you. really beautiful stuff. But while this is beautiful, I wanted to actually take us into like a little bit of a morbid place. Because why not? It's Saturday morning. It's a beautiful day. Let's go morbid. Okay. So we have this text that I gave you. So Rabbi Bachya talks about a fascinating custom. All right.
Thank you. It is the practice of the pious in France that they make their casket, aron, for burial out of their table. They do this to show that a person will not take anything in his hand, and nothing of his labor will accompany him, except for tzedakah that he did in his life, and the goodness he bestowed at his table. Therefore, the rabbis said, one who sits at length at his table has his days and years lengthened.
Well, I was thinking of the quotation. I don't remember where it came from, but it said, build me a sanctuary so that I may live among you. And that is the place, so that we have good reason to do what we're doing.
Okay. So you're saying, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, right? Build for me a sanctuary and I will dwell among you. So that's what we're doing, right? When we're building the Mishkan, we're building God a dwelling place among us. So I wanted to introduce this text. First of all, it was like new to me. And it's a little bit bizarre. It also reminded me of something that I read, I don't know, like years ago, over a decade ago, where it was like somebody was talking about their mom's dinner table. And like their mom had passed away, and here was this dinner table, right? And that table is laden with all of the memories, right? The memories of, the meals had around the table, the seders had around the table, the times you hosted people, the celebrations, the crying, the fights, the like, you don't get up till the table till you clean your plate moments, like all of those things. And like how the author at the time was saying, like, how can I get rid of this table, right? But you already have your own table. So it's like this really, I don't know, for the author, obviously it was an emotional moment, but there is something really powerful about the symbol of the table. And here, Rabbi Bachya is talking about the righteous in France making their casket out of their dinner table. Would solve the problem of what to do with these tables, right? But it's not only Rabbi Bachya, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which is one of our codes of Jewish law, also has a similar text.
Benevolent people who in their lifetime fed the poor at their table should be buried in a coffin made of boards from the table, as it is written, and your righteousness shall go before you.
Okay, so in order to unpack this, we just need a little bit of Hebrew, and that is that Aron, right? Aron is the ark, right? Aron is a closet, and Aron is a casket. It's all the same word. So here there are two things that we need to build, right, for the Mishkan. Well, there's more than two things, but the two things we're focusing on is a shulchan, the special table, and we'll talk about what the special table, how it functions, and the aron. And then we hear about this like interesting custom for people to turn their shulchan into an aron, their table into a casket. So I wanted to think about like what can be gained by thinking about these two furnishings, right? The table and the casket, being made out of the same materials, and also the fact that one can be turned into the other. And to think a little bit about the difference between a table and a cupboard, right? Cupboard, there we go, there's another synonym for Aron. So, I want us to think about if we were one of these righteous people, right, living at the time of Rabbi Bachia or during the time of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, what it would be like every time we went to eat a meal at our table, knowing that this table will one day be my casket. Okay, so I got a ew, okay? You have a glass top table. All right, like what would it be like? Just like what would it be like to sit at your table if that was part of your consciousness? All right.
Mitzvah consciousness, that is, remember to bring guests to your table, remember to make blessings before and after meals, etc.
Right, beautiful. So we're thinking about this mitzvah, right, I love what Paul said, mitzvah consciousness. That every time you sit at your table, you're going to be thinking about your death, right? And you're going to be thinking about judgment a little bit, right? So what are the opportunities I have to do mitzvot at this table? So Paul gave us some beautiful examples. We have the example of saying brachot, blessing our food, being grateful, and of sharing it. Fabulous. There's something really, I think, interesting about it, like, right? So we have one day a year where we face our mortality on purpose, right? Probably face it other times too. But on Yom Kippur, right? Yom Kippur, completely morbid day, right? We practice our death. It's traditional to wear a kittel. So a kittel is it's a plain white shroud, and it's traditional to wear it on Yom Kippur and also to wear it when you get married, and that is supposed to be the garment that you're buried in. So there's something, right, on Yom Kippur when we are literally wearing our death shroud on that day, on this day where, like, you know, it's not Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment, right? But Yom Kippur is when it's sealed. And we aren't practicing life-affirming things, right? We're not eating. We are not bathing and adorning ourselves, although, like, right, at Beth Am, people still bathe and adorn themselves. That's fine. We don't eat. We don't drink. We don't have sex, right? We don't do a lot of those things, and yet, right, we leave the day, like, so joyful. So I want to, like, just kind of keep this in the back of our heads, because I think there's something really beautiful about having one day a year to be totally morbid, right? One day a year where we think about, if I were judged today, how would I stack up, right? How would I do? And how can I change so that when I am actually judged, I will look better, right? But here, there's something when what Rabbi Bachia is teaching, that every time we were sitting down to eat, we have a moment of judgment. It's interesting. I was talking to one of my rabbinic mentors, and I was telling her that I feel like as rabbis, we get Yom Kippurs constantly, right? Every time I bury someone, I think and I hear the eulogies, right? They are beautiful and they are moving, and they're also like a gut check. You know, what are people going to say? How are you living your life? So here, Rabbi Bach is saying, not just once a year, not just when someone you care about has passed away, right? Every time you sit to eat, you're going to think about it. And you think about what happens at this table. So Paul mentioned 2 mitzvot, right? Saying brachot, inviting people. But your table would also be a place where you might learn Torah. Your table might be a place where you have important conversations. Your table might be a place where you host guests, where you distribute tzedakah. And every time you're doing those things, you're confronted with death. So what's interesting too, and I want to come back to at the end, is that he supports this custom with the quote from the Talmud in Barachot, one who sits at length at his table has his days and years lengthened, right? So there's already a little bit of irony in what he's saying, right? That you're like basically looking at your coffin and your life is getting longer. So I would love to like make some connections there. Okay. So one way to understand and appreciate this custom is to think about what these items represent and how they can be converted into each other, right? So we think about one as being more temporary and the other as being more permanent, right? So if I have a plate on my table, right, it's temporary, right? It's whatever I'm serving, or it's the dish I'm eating from, etc., right? But if I have the plate in the closet, right, in the cupboard, right, that's its storage spot, right? It's a little bit more fixed, a little bit more permanent. The aron is where things are supposed to stay for an extended period of time, where they belong, right? But we do take things out, right? Hopefully not a casket, but when it's when it is an ark, or when it is a cupboard, or when it is a closet. The first verse that we have from Shemot, that we have this permanent vessel that is holding things, the aron, right? That while what is in the aron stays in there, we actually take it with us wherever we go. It is the most mobile of all of the Mishkan's furnishings, right? Because it's the one that you can never remove the poles from. So you're always ready to take it, always ready to move with it. Similarly, there is something with the bread of the shulchan. So one of the other rules that we get in Shemot 25, there we go, Shemot 25:30, you can see it's just one line, and you will place the showbread before me constantly. So this is how we are using the shulchan in the Mishkan, is that we always have this showbread on the table. I think that's like the funniest name, right? Showbread. It's like the don't eat bread. So the showbread is always there. And the rabbis in the Mishnah take very seriously this word tamid, this idea of it constantly being there. So if we're always supposed to have bread there, but you have to swap out the bread, right? How are you going to make sure that it's tamid, right? This is like the fun question. We talked about this in rabbinical school once, like about like when do you change the light for the Ner Tamid? Right? How do you change the light for the Ner Tamid? If it's always supposed to be there, always supposed to be on, like what, how do you do? And people share traumatic stories of seeing the Ner Tamid light burn out. I haven't seen it happen. Okay. So, how are we going to change the showbread for fresh new loaves when they always have to be there and they always have to be present? Okay, so we're going to read from the Mishnah in Menachot, which talks about trying to keep these two things.
There were 2 tables inside the foyer, facing the entrance of the temple, one marble and one of gold. They would put the bread that was to be inserted on the marble table and the bread that was ejected on the gold one. For we increase in holiness and do not decrease. The priests who were inserting stood in the north, facing south, and 3 of those who were extracting stood in the south, facing north. As those would pull, the others would place the handbreadth of one adjacent to the handbreadth of the other, as it says, before me constantly.
Okay. So you can see, or do you have the picture in your head? Right? I'm carrying like a whole nother table, right? And you have this whole group of priests, and they're sliding, right? To make sure that there's always the proper amount of loaves on the bread, on the table at the right time so that they are constantly there, although you are getting replenished and refreshed. So it's completely like an elaborate process involving many priests, extra tables, right? To make sure that we have this presence always on the table, the shulchan. So here, the reason I wanted to share this is that I talked about the aron being the place of permanence, right? But there's a play here in our Torah portion that the shulchan becomes a place of permanence, right? There's always the showbread on the shulchan. And so we are already seeing that a play between the two, right? That there are times where the table can be permanent, and there are times where, like the transience of the aron, right? That it's the most mobile of things. Okay. So, where do I want to go to? Sorry. Okay. Hold on. Sorry. Okay. So, it's this like exchange, right? This like porousness between the two, the table and the closet, between the home of the grave that the French custom points to. What you think of as your table can eventually become your coffin. But it is equally true that what you think of as your coffin can become your table. So, I wanted to think about the times our table becomes like a coffin, right? So one way to think about that, right, is maybe your desk, right? People make fun. You guys may not know this. I have a gaming chair as my chair at my desk upstairs. Why? Because I sit at my desk all the time, right? And if gamers can sit for like 18 hours a day in these chairs, I figured they're probably pretty comfortable, right? So our desk, right, can be a place that feels like a coffin, right? When does it feel like a coffin? Don't worry, mine doesn't. Right, okay. When you're there 24/7. Thank you.
Depends what you're doing there. Well, if you're doing something that you enjoy, then you don't notice the passage of time and you feel free. If you're doing something that you think is an imposition on you, then a minute at the desk is imprisonment.
Yeah. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Right? So we can be sitting at the desk, we can get in the zone, right? We can get in flow, right? And time just flies by. And we don't even notice if we've been there for hours on end, right? But then there's certain things that we have to do at the desk, right? That like are things we don't want to do, or that they're tedious, or it's the same thing again and again and again, right? And there's no life in what we're doing. And so the desk is just one example. But I think like it's something that happens all the time. Yes.
Just following that last thought, maybe patience comes into it. Because if you're sitting at a desk and you feel like it's a total prison and you're miserable studying for this LSAT exam, just to use an example, but you got to put that time in the prison and be patient, because then you knock it out of the park when you take it, and that sets you free with scholarships and everything else.
Okay. Very cool.
So I sit at a desk most of the time, and a lot of time I'm not conscious of how I sit, but I'm working, and I can go in at 6, and I'm there sometimes at 7. And the more I knock things off my desk, sometimes the more comes in. So after a while, however, my whole body, you feel it in your body. And sometimes the deadlines come in consistently over time. And then suddenly, yes, the mind does go, because you look out the window and you want to be outside just for a moment or take a walk. But there's so much things that is due that it's more a burden, so you're trying to knock them out. So in that sense, even though I do enjoy my job and I am trying to meet all these deadlines, in that sense, it could become like a prison, even though you enjoy what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, right? So there are times where like it's like preventing you from enjoying life. And then there's, right, sometimes you have to power through in order to accomplish what you need in order to enjoy life. There's other things too. Like I hear all the time from people, right? Like that we can get caught in, we do, right? We get caught in patterns, right? And every day kind of looks the same. Right? I know I have tons of patterns, like you could probably write, like, and I have a very interesting job in that, like, what I do for work changes all the time, right? But my day, right? But like, there's something to the fact that the days look the same, right? The wake up, the getting ready, the driving to work, the work, right? Or the carpool or the whatever. And those things can be beautiful, right? We had this moment during COVID when all of our patterns were disrupted, and that was very, for some people it was wonderful, and for other people it was not wonderful. It was terrible, right? But there's something about like just getting caught in the everyday pattern of things. And thinking that we are in a situation that is fixed, that is permanent. And that's when things turn into a coffin, when we think that we are stuck and that there isn't any way to change things. So the awareness of that like makes us look at things and ask ourselves, are we choosing to act in this way, or are we being controlled, right, by habit, right? And that's the way that a table can turn into a coffin, but there's also ways that coffins can turn into tables. Yeah?
I see it also as a realization and almost mindfulness exercise when you are sitting in a table, almost like in an habit, eating the same stuff, getting everything almost without realizing like the work and taking it for granted. It's permanent, it's granted. I'm eating the same thing, I don't appreciate what I have. When you are realizing that this is not eternal and that it may change for also things that are completely also outside of your control, then there is this level of appreciation that things are not, an habit, that this food is not going to be tomorrow. And then you enjoy things also. So it's sort of a flip of the coin also.
Gorgeous. Okay. Gorgeous.
Rabbi, I think with this readings, you're challenging us to go from the physical world to the virtual world. And we, as a people, live in a world where the virtual world is within our finger grasp, or our grasp of our hand, our computer terminal. In previous generations, everyone lived in the real world. They went out and worked. They worked in a field, worked on physical objects. We now can work in a virtual world. And I think that's what you're challenging us to go in the virtual world where a table becomes a coffin. I think that's where you're headed. If maybe I'm reading you correctly or incorrectly.
Just to follow up on a thought before the last one. So, gratitude sets us free. That's how I heard your very smart, I thought, comment.
Okay, beautiful. All right. Yes. So, we have the ability always, right, to shift our perspective, to change course, as long as we're alive, right? So when we look at that table that will one day be our casket, we are also reminded that every time we sit at this table, it's not my casket yet, right? I am still alive. And I loved what you said, right? Because hopefully, if we practice gratitude, we can shift our mindset and think about like how lucky we are, right? How lucky we are to be sitting at this table, to be enjoying this food. I'm going to say a bracha, right? How lucky we are when we get to invite people around our table, to have a friend, right? To have a partner, right? People talk about, being with the same person your whole life. And like, ugh, doesn't that get boring, right? But people who have long marriages, I hear all the time, like talk about how wonderful it is, right? How wonderful it is to have somebody there who really knows you. How wonderful it is to not have to explain yourself because they already know, they already get it, right? Maybe. Yeah.
What I'm trying to think is the table can be moved. And so there you can move. The aron is permanent. A casket is permanent. So as you move the table, maybe in your mind, you become a better person. And when you get married to someone for a long time, you are not the same person when you married that person. You moved, both of you, hopefully. And therefore, it's not a permanent thing. It is always a, moving option. Yeah.
Yeah.
If we're talking in one breath about the Aron Kodesh and the other about the table we're eating brisket at, it seems to me that God instructed Moses specifically how the Aaron Kodesh is to be constructed. Nail by nail, ring by ring, pole by pole, gold leaf by gold leaf. It's not the same thing with a table. Table is the table. And I can't ascribe to the rabbi's view about what the symbolic meaning of the table. I mean, is that your mom looking up from the table telling you this is not the way I made the brisket? You know, it turns into a casket. That's a very morbid perception of honoring God. If you look at the Aaron Kodesh, you ask what's in it, not what's on it. And you know what it's made of, and you know the cherubim that are mounted on it. And that is spiritual, it's symbolic, and it's much different than the table. It takes a leap of faith to ascribe the transformation of a table into a spiritual event. I just can't buy it. I don't know who else does, but I don't.
Okay, so that's interesting because, like, I think, you know, one of the questions that this Torah portion does beg is, like, where do you feel God's presence, right? The whole question, the whole idea, asuli mikdash, right? Like, make me a dwelling place, is odd, right? Like, why? God doesn't need a dwelling place. God is everywhere. What does this even mean, right? So we have there's actually this idea of tzimtzum, right? We're more familiar, if we know what tzimtzum is, with the Lurianic, Kabbalistic idea of tzimtzum, which is that, like, God was everywhere there wasn't room for creation, so God had to contract to make room for creation, right? And then God had to, like, emanate because nothing can exist without God, right? So, but we get this idea from that, even though it's trying really hard not to have it, that there are places where there's less God, right? Or more space, right? I think of, like, particles, you know, like more. But actually, the rabbis, when they're talking about this week's Torah portion and God creating a dwelling place, they also use a derivative of tzimtzum. But it means, like, the exact opposite. Instead of God, like, creating a vacuum, it's that here's a place where God's presence is just more intensely felt. And I think we all have those places, right? Hopefully you feel it a little bit in this room, in the sanctuary, right? But a lot of us feel God's presence intensely in other spaces, right? Like in a hospital room, looking out at a beautiful vista, right? There are spaces where we feel God's presence more. And it's interesting what you say, Bobby, because like the table's supposed to be one of those places. Well, so there's did I include it on here? I didn't. Okay. There is a, you know, the rabbis say that if you're sitting at your table, that you should talk about God, right? That words of Torah should pass between you. So it becomes this holy space, right? And there's certain holidays, right? Like Passover, we have obviously a Seder here, but it's not a temple holiday. It's a home holiday. It's around your table holiday. It's you know, a practice in lavish eating, right? So our table should in many ways, like the Mishkan, have a more concentrated feeling of God's presence, right? So what happened at my table this morning, right? Like where one kid came to the table, the other one didn't, right? And he came to the table with his iPad, right? Not talking, interfacing, right? Like, it was not a holy space at all, right? And it didn't feel holy. It felt draining, right? But there is something to like how do we make our table holy? And I think that's part of what this text challenges us to do. It's hard. I would say I know it's always been hard, but it's very hard in the now to have meals around the table anymore.
There is a story about the teacher who assigned the little children to make drawings, and the teacher asked the little girl, "Well, what are you drawing?" She said, "I'm drawing the face of God." And the teacher said, "Well, nobody knows what God looks like." And the little girl looked up at the teacher and said, "Well, wait just a minute."
That's a cute story. I like it. Yeah. Judy.
Actually, death is a very solitary experience. It's something that we go through alone, really. But a table is communal. And perhaps, by having the table become your casket, you're bringing the community with you.
That's beautiful. So right. Again, like when we're in community, we're like, oh, go ahead.
I guess this works. I'm always note that it doesn't. We build the tabernacle, but God doesn't say, "I'm going to live in it." He says, "I'm going to be among you." So we may think that we're putting him putting God in a place, but God is saying, "This is where I will be among you." God won't be in that tabernacle. God will be with the people.
So there's something like really beautiful in what Edith is saying in terms of, right, that it's not like here's where God is. I have to only go there to experience God, right? But there's something about us building space for God that allows God to be with us, right? Like we're creating space for holiness, right? Which is kind of the struggle I'm talking about in terms of having our table be a holy place.
I have a slight question on the practicality of the table as your coffin. How does it work when you have 10 people around the same table? Like, what's the minhag for these pious people in France?
Yeah, you have to right. That's a very good question. I wondered as well. My assumption is that it was for the, master of the house. But I kind of like, I don't know. I kind of like the idea of like, Bubby's kitchen, kind of like, it's Bubby's table. But that's a good question. That's a very good question. Thank you.
Just very short, you were saying, or someone was saying that the table is meant to be, a place for gathering, community, and so forth. And a lot that we have discussed in other classes had to do also with the sense that God, and it's built upon the sense of community as well. And Shabbat is bringing the community together. So if you were just saying in the table you're supposed to talk about God, well, that community within the table, it's gathering the people together around food and like talking to God.
Beautiful. So when we say like Hine matovu manaim shevet gam yachad, right? So the word gam is extraneous. We don't need the word gam. So the rabbis, of course, comment on this, right? Why do we have gam yachad? Because when friends are sitting together, then there's a third presence there, right? There's or a fourth or a fifth, right? That like if we are together and we're having a sacred interaction, that God is in that space too, which is really beautiful, right? And there's certain prayers we don't say alone. We don't say the call to worship alone. We don't say the Kaddish alone, right? So I wanna go to the next text.
The Baal Shem Tov taught that what it means to be old is not to have lived for many years, but rather to have grown tired of life. There are young people who are old and old people who are young. In the words of his grandson, the Degal Mahane Ephraim, do not discard me at the time of aging, meaning that the matter will be old to him. For just as aging causes weakness in all of the limbs of a person due to the fact that his strength and suppleness and flow of the blood which sustains a person weaken, similarly in matters of the spirit, something which is old and aged does not give him enjoyment or great liveliness and has no new component.
Thank you. All right, so here the Baal Shem Tov is trying to and his grandson are separating age and being old. Right? I love that. Right? I watched The Bachelor. Bachelor had an ad, and it was like, do you know seniors who are full of life and young at heart? Right? Because apparently they're doing a senior version of The Bachelor. Right? And I've seen it. I'm sure a lot of you have, right? That there are. My grandfather died at 97. Pretty awesome, right? He lived a long life. He went swimming in the ocean every single morning. Like he was in the Polar Bear Club before that was a thing. He was super duper active until he was around 95. And around 95, he had to start getting blood transfusions. And you could see it click in his head. Now I'm old. And he started acting old. Sometimes our bodies make us act a certain way, right? But his whole attitude changed. Everything changed. Like his whole demeanor changed. He barely liked to argue with me about how my branch of Judaism was not correct. It was so, but this also happens in younger people too, right? Like there's people who like want to drink from life and live it. And here that's like associated with young, but it has nothing to do with age.
Some of this is a culture. I agree with you 100%. And a lot of it is cultural. How many of us have said, I never related to my parents. They lived in a whole different culture than I do. They were immigrants. They were first generation Americans. They lived in a different culture. And how we relate, we believe we relate more to our children and our grandchildren than our parents related to us. And I don't know whether that's a perception or it's a reality, but it certainly fosters, in one respect, a greater family unit when we all relate together. May not all agree, but we all relate.
I do think there's a shift. I do think that people are younger now, longer. Just like I think that there's less, right? Because there was this. You're right. Like culturally, right? Like when my bubby, I think about. Oh, it's not my. Yeah, but my husband's grandmother, who died at 103, amazing. I remember the first time I went to go and meet her. We walked into the home. You know, she was at an old age home. We walk into the home, and my husband started laughing because I was like, oh, what does she look like? Oh, you know, she is like, you know, she's little white curly hair, short curly hair, and we open up the door and every woman in there, right, had like the short curly hair. It was like the do, and it was the same one my bubby had, but anyways, right, that there's something about like, and we don't have that anymore, right? And people have their look and they don't have a look, right? So there's something, I do think that people stay young longer. And I think like knowing that life is long, like gives us more opportunities. So Tehillim says, do not cast me off in old age. When my strength fails, do not forsake me. So we have Dina Weiss is commenting on this in the Baal Shem Tov, where she says, the psalmist says he is afraid of aging, right? But he's not talking to the passing of years themselves, but the way habit can make the new feel old. The psalmist knows the risk of old age is the tendency to fall prey to habit, to feel nothing is malleable. So his request of God is that he be able to always keep himself in a youthful mindset and spiritual attitude. All right, so here we're seeing like that we don't want to get stuck in habit, right? Or if we have habits, we don't want to get stuck in like being bored of the habit or feeling trapped in the habit. We want to feel like appreciative of the habit, right? There's the Nisim B'chol Yom that we say, our daily miracles, right? It's the same ones we say every morning, right? Thank you for the rooster crow. I grew up in Indiana. That was actually a thing there. But thank you for, being able to stand up. Thank you for, girding me with strength, right? Putting on my clothes, right? Thank you for making me a Jew. I put on my kippah, right? Like, thank you for all of these things. Thank you for opening my eyes, taking the sleep out of my eyes. Right? All of these things we say every morning, right? My other favorite morning blessing, of course, is the bathroom blessing, the Asher Yatzar, right? So, like, these things, we try and exactly what you're saying, like, appreciate every single day, right? Because what if today what if I get another day? How great is that, right? And what if today I couldn't go to the bathroom, right? Then I would end up in the hospital, right? Any day I can stand up and get dressed. Wow. Wow. Like, and thinking about, like, what are all of these things that we take for granted and how can we be more mindful, more present in that moment, right? When we say, like, the brachas over the food, right? I eat the same thing for breakfast every morning, and I think it's delicious, right? So you think about the showbread like that. It's constant, the tamid, but it's also always new, right? It's always being refreshed. So, like, how do we make the tamid? How do we make the permanent always fresh? How do we make the aron, the place of permanency, into a shulchan? And I wanted to bring in, I'm trying to wrap it up, so I apologize. In Psalm 23, you are all familiar with this line, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, right? He maketh me a table before mine enemies. I put a different translation here. Array a table before me in front of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. You've saturated my head with oil, my cup is full, right? So it's kind of a weird thing, right? We read this at funerals, right? We read this at yard sites, this psalm. And by the way, you can read any psalm. Halachically, all that we're told is you're supposed to read psalms, right? It doesn't say which, right? But have you ever been to a funeral where they didn't read Psalm 23? No, we all read it. So but we don't ever like kind of pull back and say, like, this is a weird verse to have at a funeral, right? Spread a table before me in front of my enemies. Like, what is that all about? So we get like a kind of interesting, like with this text, with this custom, we can get like a really interesting understanding of what does it mean to set a table before me in front of my enemies. Because as long as I'm at my table, I'm alive. And it means that like I have all of these choices and all of these options, right? I'm not in the casket yet. And when we're at a funeral and we are literally looking at a casket, right? And we are thinking of what are people going to say about me, and we're thinking of this relationship with somebody who we lost. To say at that moment, I still have a table. I'm still here. I'm still present. And it's hard when we confront death to like love life. I know like it's like a cliche thing that, you know, death is supposed to like inspire you to like live life, right? When you get the cancer diagnosis, you're supposed to like embrace life. And some people are able to do that, but a lot of us can't. A lot of us fall into despair, right? And so here we have this moment where it's like, no, you have a table in front of you. Like you are still alive, you know? And it's in front of your enemies. And your enemies don't have to be external. It could be internal. And my head, I'm anointed. I am anointed, right? My head is covered in oil. That's Mashiach, by the way, right? So I have a purpose still. My cup, I have lost someone, but my cup runneth over. I have more than I need. It's a crazy juxtaposition. So I wanted to share this text with you, the last being Chagiga 27. It says this a few times in the Talmud, but this is one of the places where it really connects our table to the Mishkan. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish both say the following exposition: when the temple is standing, the altar atones for a person. Now that the temple has been destroyed, it is a person's table that atones for him. And you can see the Steinsaltz ads for feeding the needy guests atones for his sins. And he's picking up on Rashi through welcoming guests here. So we are reading in our Torah about building this holy space for God. But our rabbis taught us that since when the temple was destroyed, now it's our table that atones. And every day when we sit at our table, we are confronted not just with our mortality, but like with the fact that we're alive. And we have so many opportunities to fill that table with blessings, with mitzvahs, and to make sure that we are being present to notice all of the blessings that are being sent our way. Right, Shabbat Shalom.